Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 15th of January 2024. We're going to start in the aid section, in the military equipment and aid to both sides here, the Ukrainian and the Russian side. We're going to start this section with a bit of a corrective, not quite a corrective because I did say this. The other day when Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of UK, went to Kiev and then said, they signed a security agreement and the UK upped their military assistance to Ukraine by £200 million to £2.5 million. I was pretty excited the first day. I was like, this is cool. It's great that Britain are doing this. And actually, it is paving the way for other nations to do so in a sense. But then the next day I was like, actually, 2.5 billion isn't that much compared to other nations and compared to our GDP. And so we need to understand the whole context. Now, on the one hand, I don't want to be cheerleading the UK because I'm British and go, whoa, whoop-de-doo, the UK. On the other hand, I don't want to be criticising Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government because I'm not pro-Conservative in my politics. But the reality is actually that the UK have done good things in terms of the type of aid that's been given. So we've been the first for like Storm Shadows and for tanks, actually challenges the two main battle tanks. And these key pieces of kit that we have given that has allowed other people the permission to give those things as well and start the ball rolling. So I think the UK has been really good. But on the other hand, we are perhaps overselling how much we have helped Ukraine, or at least how much we are giving to Ukraine. And here, Philip O'Brien publishes an article in The Spectator. So The Spectator, for those who don't know, is really quite a right-wing news outlet in the UK, owned by the same people as The Telegraph, I think, but sits slightly further to right. However, Philip O'Brien I don't think is actually. So it's interesting that he's got an article in The Spectator. So just published in The Spectator. I mean, he's pro-European and so on and so forth. It's putting UK support to Ukraine in context. Actually, the UK is by far one of the least generous donors to Ukraine in per capita terms. So per number of people we have in the country, actually, we are not giving as much as most other European nations, even with the small increase that everyone seemed to get excited about yesterday. Okay, so I think it's fair for me to read this out. Please don't think that I'm trying to slam the UK, but I am trying to just get an accurate portrayal of what's going on, accurate picture. Does Rishi Sunak care about Ukraine? I think he does, and I think what he has done acts both for his own political benefits, but also for the benefit of Ukraine, and it's the right thing to do, and it's in line with our strategies. The question is it enough? For all the triumphalism, backstabbing and self-congratulation, the UK is one of the least generous supporters of Ukraine in all of Europe, says Philip O'Brien. As a percentage of GDP, the UK has been a veritable minnow in the European Sea, with its combined military and economic support for Ukraine totaling 0.45%. Only military superpowers like Ireland at 0.38% and Switzerland at 0.3% of GDP have given less, while many states in the Baltics, Nordics and Central Eastern Europe, with whom Britain likes to pretend it makes common cause, have given 3 or even almost 4 times as much of their GDP. The signs are that the UK will fall further behind in the coming months. Even Sunak's pledge this week for British aid to Ukraine, which is getting lots of coverage, is only a small increase. In the first 2 years of the war, during which Britain was one of the smallest contributors of aid to Ukraine, the combined total of military aid given by the UK was £4.6 billion, or £2.3 billion per year. Now Britain is pledging to increase this to £2.5 billion. Germany, on the other hand, is doubling its military aid in the coming year. So not just moving from 2.3 to 2.5 billion pounds, they're doubling from 4 billion, already larger, 4 billion euros to 8 billion euros, dwarfing the UK's offer. And this doesn't include its European contribution. So on top of that, they also contribute to the EU, which the UK does not do. And the EU is giving stuff to Ukraine in massive amounts. I mean, they're trying to get a $50 billion package, of which Germany will be subsidizing that to 25% or thereabouts. So Germany is absolutely crapping all over the UK in terms of what it gives. And yet, actually, there I was going, this is brilliant, although there are caveats attached. Well, those caveats are quite substantial. Elsewhere in Europe, there have been moves to ramp up support for Ukraine. The potential catastrophe of the US withdrawing its support and the need to help Ukraine as much as possible is in what is clearly an existential war with an imperialist mass-murdering neighbour has led many states to increase their aid pledges to keep Ukraine fighting. Estonia, for instance, has already pledged over aid to Ukraine worth 1.4% of its GDP, over 3 times as much as the UK in terms of percentage of GDP, has further pledged to aid Ukraine with at least 0.25% of its GDP every year for the next, I think it's 4 years, is it? Anyway, he says going forward. So, strangely, though, as the UK slips to the bottom of the European rankings in its support for Ukraine, it still likes to act as if it's one of Ukraine's greatest champions. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps regularly tries to score political points by highlighting the UK's supposedly strong backing for Ukraine, playing up Britain's role in training the Ukrainian army. But when asked about UK tangible financial aid for Ukraine in weapons and supplies, he is far more reticent. Recently, after preaching to the US about the need for America to keep aiding Ukraine, Shapps was asked whether the UK would continue to match its relatively small financial support. At this, he balked. Aid for Ukraine, he said, was, quote, not just about the money, and he went on to make a frankly bizarre argument that more aid wasn't needed because the war was entering a new phase. The idea in the next year of undoubtedly brutal combat, Ukraine won't need aid, is certainly a novel reading of the war. And Phillips O'Brien goes on, but I think the point is fairly clear, actually, that we need to be careful when we see Grant Shapps and Rishi Sunak and British people and myself like cheerleading what the UK is doing, and it has done an amazing job in certain areas. Actually, there is an argument, a very strong argument, that we really could do and should do an awful lot more. It's very difficult to criticise the US for not releasing their aid when actually, arguably, we are not giving as much as most of the European neighbours we have. So I think I'm sure that will annoy a lot of very nationalistic British people out there who want to cheerlead what we're doing. But I think we also need to get perspective. I'd be very interested to see what you guys think about this article. Is he correct in pointing that out? Is he correct in what he says? Ukraine does not rule out any help from partners regarding multi-purpose aircraft, attack aircraft, helicopters, but F-16 deliveries are currently a priority. This was announced by the commander of the Air Force of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleshchuk. Quote, today the Air Force has 4 main types of combat aircraft, and they will gradually be replaced by Western equipment. So what the conversation is going to be in the next few minutes is going to concern what aircraft Ukraine are interested in getting. But we've also got to remember that there are 2 elements here. There's stuff we need now, stuff that Ukraine needs now, and the pilots needing to be trained on those aircraft, and how Ukraine sees its Air Force in a kind of strategic way going forward for the next X number of years. And the idea that they will be acceding to NATO, and NATO will have a requirement for the types of planes that Ukraine is using in the Air Force. They will need to replace all of their aircraft and move over to NATO airframes. And in that longer term framework, there are going to be other things to consider. So it's whether these comments from Ukrainian sources are concerning that longer term strategy or something more short term. So breaking news, Ukraine is considering other aircraft like Mirage 2000D in addition to the F-16 and A-10. So let's talk about the A-10, the Warthog. PS01 says, quote, to make things clear, I, as commander of the Air Force, fully support the position of commander of the Ground Forces, Colonel General Alexander Syrski, regarding strengthening the capabilities of strike aviation to ensure the offensive and defensive actions of the defense forces. I emphasize that the Air Force considered and is considering various aviation platforms for strengthening and further development of combat aviation in Ukraine. The priority today is, of course, mastering the F-16, for which Ukrainian pilots are already being retrained. However, our experts are studying other possibilities for increasing the combat potential of aviation as a whole. So this is where people might be getting the wrong idea. I think that it's like, this is what we want now, but I think it's maybe going forward into the medium to long term. Every day I am in constant contact with the commander of the ground forces and armed forces of Ukraine, the leaders of the troop groups, and we do everything to ensure the maximum possible cover to the troops from enemy air attacks in various directions. Today the Air Force has 4 main types of combat aircraft, which will gradually be replaced by Western equipment. I emphasize that we do not exclude any help from partners regarding multi-purpose aircraft, attack aircraft, helicopters. Of course, mastering each new type of aircraft is difficult and not a quick process for us, but we will get through it. So it's not going to be quick, but we will do it. Of course, we will not be able to immediately abandon the operation of Soviet aircraft. Therefore, alongside the F-16, the MiG-29 will operate in the sky. It's possible that the combat capabilities of the Su-24M bombers will be strengthened by the Mirage 2000D and a Su-25 attack aircraft by the A-10 Thunderbolt II. So the big question is that comment. What is a time frame on that? Because that's saying, right, we're going to be operating F-16s. So Mirage 2000 is going to come after we've got F-16s on board to some degree. And the MiG-29s and Su-24s will operate alongside that. But we would also like the Mirage 2000D. So it's previously, there was the claim that the Gripen would be the preferred one to the Mirage. Mirage, I think, was fourth. It went F-16, Gripen, Eurofighter, Typhoon, Mirage 2000D. It could be that they are trying to bump that up, maybe, or who knows what exactly is going on with the Gripen. I mean, it does seem that the Ukrainian pilots are training on that to some degree at the moment. The other day, he continues, they discussed with Colonel General Syrsky promising directions for further work in the field of development and strengthening of the aviation component of the Air Force and Army aviation of the ground forces. And we do everything to ensure that our troops are covered from the air and the enemy feels the powerful fist of strike aircraft. Now, you've also got to remember that the first visit of the French foreign minister was to Kyiv, and that was yesterday. And this then comes out pretty much after that. So it is no surprise, I think, that Mirage is suddenly mentioned after the French foreign minister has visited. You've also got to remember that when foreign ministers go and visit, when defense ministers go and visit Ukraine, they are going to be acting on behalf of their own industries and countries. So the French foreign minister will be trying to push Ukraine to choose French equipment to buy, not necessarily to be given, but to buy. And so therefore, Mirage turns up in the rhetoric of the Ukrainians is no surprise. You know, the French foreign minister would have been pushing French equipment big time. But anyway, interesting discussion there, I think. Right, going on to Germany. This is German aid to Ukraine. Markus Faber, member of the Defense Committee in the Bundestag, or the German Parliament, also advocates a better supply of spare parts for Ukraine, in this case for the Gepard Spags, that self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, after having seen the situation for himself on site in Kyiv and Odessa. He says that spare parts must be prioritized politically in Germany. He also confirms that only a few of the 52 Gepards supplied by Germany were damaged by the Russian army. He speaks in the plural. Only one case is actually known so far. You can read more about the failures of the Gepard Spags and the supply of spare parts here in an interview with the Ukrainian officer who coordinates technical difficulties of the air defense around Kyiv. So that is worth looking into with German aid from Ukraine. So go and check out his stuff on deidua.org and also on his threads, and you can see that interview with someone talking about the Gepard there. Now, Mick Ryan is talking about what's going on in Australia here, and there's this idea that these Taipan helicopters are going to be, well, actually buried rather than given to Ukraine, or potentially this could be the case. So Mick Ryan, the retired Australian general, says this is becoming a growing scandal for the Australian government, which refuses to provide reasonable answers to questions about why these aircraft can't be transferred to Ukraine. For those who propose that they are too complex for Ukraine to operate, I present here evidence of M1 and Leopard 2 tanks, HIMARS Scout missiles, and the Patriot air defense system, all of which Ukraine has mastered. So this is the idea that the Australian government unfortunately hasn't communicated why those helicopters have been decommissioned and why they are being buried into the ground. Hopefully there's time to reverse that decision. So these Taipans. For those who claim supportability issues, Taipans in Ukraine would be much closer to European support bases used by nearly a dozen other military organizations for these helicopters. The same argument was used to initially deny tanks, missiles, and F-16s to Ukraine. For those who claim that Taipans aren't fit for purpose, perhaps we should ask the views of Finland, Germany, New Zealand, Spain, France, Belgium, Sweden, and other nations who successfully operate them. Goodness me, UK have given 3 Sea Kings, and those are pretty old bits of kit, and they're being used. Not only is this a scandalous decision, it is immoral. Rushing to bury usable helicopters rather than transferring them to a nation fighting for its life is shameful and a national embarrassment. These helicopters could be vital in transporting battlefield casualties. The ability to get wounded soldiers to appropriate military hospitals inside the golden hour can save many, many lives. Burying the Taipan denies this mission to the Ukrainian ground forces. The Australian government should immediately suspend any disposal action of the Taipan. Further, it should establish a rapid and independent review of whether they are technically capable of still being flown and sent to Ukraine. The lack of transparency around this issue speaks poorly of defence and the government and democracy here. As a country, we can and should do much better to communicate government decision making to citizens and to support our democracies, other democracies, in desperate need of assistance. So he says to his MP and Prime Minister, I only ask that you lead Australia in doing the right thing here. At the very least, we owe our citizens and Ukraine a full and honest answer of what has happened and what we can do to resolve this situation. I believe our country can do better. Okay. Then we're going to go to a further article here. This is in the Financial Times. John Ridge, who's a bit of an expert on these matters, says this article is a big yikes. Frankenstein is specifically the umbrella name for projects integrating legacy Soviet AD assets and Western interceptors. IRIS-T, SLM, and SAMP-T are not in the same range class nor are they maneuver SAMs. SAMP-T and S300V have ABM capability as well. So I think he's picking up on the term Frankenstein being used possibly slightly incorrectly in this Financial Times article. Nonetheless, let's see what the article says. Missiles from Iran and North Korea boost Russia's onslaught on Ukraine. We're going to come down this article somewhat to join it halfway down. Ukraine's mishmash of air defense systems and surface-to-air missiles, dubbed Frankenstein, that's not really the mishmash. That is when they use these older Russian Soviet systems and then adapt NATO missiles to go in them, for example, with a book. So it's not quite how I would use that. I think that's what John Ridge was saying. Has struggled to cope. Anyway, the network has struggled to cope. The first layer of defense, mobile units are often a US-provided Humvee mounted with Stinger surface-to-air missile systems or heavy machine guns. Here, just to let you know, here we have a mobile team. So this is a Stinger. This is an Avenger, basically a Humvee with 8 Stinger missiles on top, but also a chap with a Martlet. That's a British-provided MANPAD there, man-portable air defense system. But yeah, the ANTWQ Avenger 1 Avenger there. So that's what they're talking about. Those kind of those kind of vehicles or Gepards have been a cheap and effective way of taking down drones and occasionally cruise missiles too. According to Alexander, a warrior soldier has manned a mobile defense team outside Kyiv. But strong units are now struggling to maneuver in deep snow, leaving the next layer of Ukraine's air defences, which includes medium-range systems such as the German-provided IRIS-T and SAMP-T from France and Italy, to intercept these missiles and drones. Of course, they're much more expensive to use. The combined use of hypersonic and subsonic weapons has made it hard for Ukraine to prioritise its air defence targets, says Sam Cranny-Evans, Associated Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute think tank in London. Hardest of all to intercept are ballistic missiles, which Ignat said only US-made Patriot systems can take down. But Ukraine has just a few Patriot batteries, and the interceptor missiles so far are expensive and in relatively short supply due to rising demand from Israel. Including from Israel, sorry. Here's just a little look at the trajectory of these different missiles and weapons. So you've got the drones, you've got the red, the cruise missiles, the normal cruise missiles, and then you've got ballistic missiles. There are kind of semi-ballistic missiles, or it's got different missiles will do a range of these things. But essentially, you've got this parabolic trajectory of a ballistic missile, and what's difficult about these is they go up into almost into the edges of the atmosphere, or they can go outside the atmosphere, come back in, and then in so doing, in having that trajectory, they gain awful lot of pace as they come down, and that makes them very difficult to hit. And also they're a lot further away. Although they can be spotted by radar, there's not a lot you can do about them until they get closer, and by that time they're going too fast. Cruise missiles are spotted much later because of the curvature of the Earth. For those flat earthers out there, all this is of course nonsense, but for those who believe in reality, this is actually what happens. So cruise missiles are spotted later, but they're going slower, and although they can sometimes move to try and dodge air defenses and whatnot, they are able to be shot down even by autocannons and whatnot. In fact, we have heard of cruise missiles being shot down by small arms fire on occasion. And then the drones, likewise, a similar trajectory. So anyway, Russia's alleged use of North Korean ballistic missiles in Ukraine, which would violate UN sanctions, has underlined how the balance of supplies might be moving in Moscow's favor, said officials and military analysts. Yang Uk, a defense expert at the Asian Institute for Policy Studies in Seoul, said North Korea could have reserves of up to 100 KN-23s. These are these ballistic missiles they've supposedly given a few of to Russia, most of which it might transfer to Russia for the right price. Quote, Pyongyang needs cash right now more than it needs war, and it can always build a new stockpile, Yang said. Kiev's allies, led by the US, condemned North Korea's arms transfers this week. Russian officials have called the allegations US disinformation. Moscow was also in actively advancing talks with Tehran to acquire close-range ballistic missiles, said US National Security spokesman John Kirby. Iran has the largest ballistic missile program in the Middle East and could supply Russia with a few hundred ballistic missiles just to start, said Behnam Ben Taleblu, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a US think tank. With its economy on a war footing, Russia now makes more than 100 long-range missiles a month, compared with about 40 at the start of the invasion. So they've upped their production of missiles. The question is, what's the quality of these? There are talks that the quality isn't as good. Possibly, it could be a rumor. But nonetheless, it might not matter because they're producing over twice as many. And about 300 attack drones, according to Ukrainian and Western officials. That is not enough to sustain the current pace of attacks, which were only possible after Russia stockpiled missiles for months. Exactly what I've been talking about and why you don't see these on consecutive nights. However, they have Iran and North Korea to pull from. But Iranian-supplied drones and North Korean missiles make up for some of the shortfall. Quote, Russia is using whatever it can to wear out Ukraine, said Gustav Gressel, a former Austrian military officer. Great interview with him on Silicon Curtain, I think, and now a senior policy fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations think tank. While Russia is shoring up supplies, Ukraine's allies in Europe and US have been unable to approve more than $100 billion of military aid. The EU has also fallen short of fulfilling existing pledges made to Kyiv, sending less than half the 1 million rounds of ammunition it promised last year. Actually, it's promised that by the end of March, so that's not quite fair reporting there. It's still got 2.5 months to procure that. Not saying it will, but let's be fair. Tokyo, it does go on to say, well, Tokyo, Japan have said that they would ease weapons export curbs so they can backfill the US with Japanese-made Patriot missiles. Kiev has also developed a missile with a claimed 700-kilometer range and aims to make more than 11,000 medium and long-range attack drones this year. Then you've got the Taurus long-range missile that could be getting to Ukraine. I mean, that'd be great if it could. So on and so forth. So it's not the end of the world, but, that is a challenging picture for Ukraine painted there. Right, moving on. Polish factories go to war, according to a media outlet that has letters in an order that I can't compute. And then another word with a similar characteristic, followed by Nitrochem, I can say that. Plant has increased TNT production to maximum levels. So Luzhnik, factory in Radom, wants to produce 100,000 rifles a year. Huta Stalowa Wola howitzer and APC plant is tasked with doubling deliveries in 2 years. So Poland is really ramping up their own production, and one would assume that would be largely due to the Ukraine war. Of course, Polish army is massively increasing in size and capability at the moment. Poles are spending an awful lot on defense, more than the US in terms of percentage of GDP. Kalashnikov says it produced 8 times as many sniper rifles in 2023 as in 2022. And that is a challenge for the Ukrainians. That's the Russian weapons manufacturer there. Right, okay, moving on to geopolitical bits and pieces. Zelensky will arrive in Switzerland today. During his visit, he will meet with the heads of both houses of parliament, party leaders and the president of Switzerland, and hold a number of bilateral meetings. Obviously, he's going to want to try and release some of those many Leopard 1 tanks that are hanging around in various places. You've also got Gepards and Gepard ammunition. The neutrality of Switzerland is getting in the way of them being able to provide weapons or even backfill particularly easily to other nations. So that's probably going to be something they'll be talking about. There's been a meeting in Davos, the World Economic Forum, over the last few days. 80 countries attend the Ukraine Peace Formula meeting at Davos, although I don't know how much actually was achieved in the meeting. but they have been meeting. There's been this call for China to play a significant role. We must find ways to work with China on this, Cassie said after a meeting of the top diplomats who had gathered in Davos for the World Economic Forum to discuss Ukraine's peace plan. That's a Swiss diplomat saying China needs to help end the war in Ukraine and needs to be involved in efforts to end Russia's war. And of course it does. Speaking of China, China's direct exports to Russia, red, are up massively since the invasion, but indirect exports via Central Asia, blue, are up massively too. Why does China bother with Central Asia if it can just send stuff to Russia directly? Plausible deniability for questionable exports. So not only is Russia sending an awful lot more stuff not only is China sending an awful lot more stuff to Russia directly, but they're also exporting to places like Kyrgyzstan, right? You might ask why they're doing that. So that stuff going to Kyrgyzstan will be your dodgy stuff. And the stuff that they're directly exporting will be possibly dual purpose stuff, but stuff that's more above board. You know, obviously cars and washing machines and all that kind of stuff, but a bunch of equipment that will also have, you know, components in that can be used in missiles, etc., etc. So they're doing both. And that is a real challenge for Ukraine. Farmers in Romania have resumed their blockade. Are they? Aren't they? Are they? Aren't they? They are, apparently. The border blocking with Ukraine. Likewise, the border crossings with Poland are continuing to be blocked. The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine said on the situation the Polish-Ukrainian border, currently there are 1,200 trucks waiting in line. So that's still an issue there as well, as yet completely unresolved. So, Lukoil's Nizhegorodsky oil refinery, the largest Russian oil refinery, has reduced in half the production of the high-octane gasoline. This oil refinery has 2 fluid catalytic cracking units that are using Western compressors. Both of them broke last year. Since January the 10th, Lukoil suspended the sale of AI 95 gasoline. And this, again, is more evidence that Russia is sort of suffering. Yes, they are getting imports from China and Kyrgyzstan and, you know, Eurasia and whatnot, and they are being able to artificially prop up their economy to some degree, but the cracks are showing. And here is another example. So much of their oil and gas production and distribution revolves around or depends upon Western corporations and Western entities, and with the sanctions they've fully pulled out, and it means that the Russians are unable to maintain their own equipment and build new equipment. Appearing on Russian state TV, State Duma member, so the Russian parliament member, Zuravyov, rejoices that the situation in Yemen is to Russia's advantage. Exactly what happened in Israel-Palestine. They are loving this, and they're amplifying the rhetoric, and we'll talk about that in a second, because everyone is forgetting about Ukraine. Zuravyov adds that Poland is starting to realize that it's next. So again, it's just all you need to do is listen to the Russian propagandists to understand really what Russia are intending. But when you look at all of these useful idiots, or indeed manipulated information space entities like Jake Shields, Dr. Anastasia Maria, what's her name? I forget the rest of her name there. And Jackson Hinkle. These are all like effectively pro-Russian trolls, but whether they're doing it wittingly or unwittingly is up for debate. But they are amplifying the Russian narrative. Gary Kasparov says they stand with thugs, terrorists, and dictatorships who oppose the US interests and want to kill Jews. So Jake Shields, I stand with Yemen. Anastasia, we stand with Yemen. Jackson Hinkle, American patriots, stand with Yemen. It's more complicated than that, but you know, if you're being told this by these people, then you need to understand where these people are coming from, what they've said previously, how much they've also been standing up for Russia against Ukraine. Makes you wonder. Right. In case it wasn't already obvious to everyone that Putin is waiting for Trump to win in 2024, so again, I'm going to mention this because Russian propagandists are mentioning this, so that he can take whatever he wants with Trump's assistance. Here are what the propagandists are saying. As it was discussed, this is a quote from it, as it was discussed in the US presidential elections, people who will come to power, meaning Trump, we should show up to these negotiations with borders that will suit us more or less. So it's the idea that if Trump gets in, we will be able to get the borders, more or less the borders that we want. you've already heard Trump say that very publicly, that he will negotiate away Ukraine's territory. He says that's going to have to happen. And here the Russians are basically agreeing that that's exactly what will happen. They will get what they want. If Trump gets in, they will get what they want. So just, when the Russians are saying it, be warned. And then this, honestly, this absolutely scares the bejesus out of me. This is anecdotal. It is just one human being. Let me know if you think this is representative. This is worrying.
The other day, Donald Trump said on his first day he's going to be a dictator for a day.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Would you rather have Donald Trump as a dictator for 4 years or re-elect Joe Biden for 4 years?
I would rather have Donald Trump. I'd like to see the repeal of the Roosevelt law so that he can be a president for a lot more than 4 years. But this country needs a dictator. I hate to say that, but it's the truth.
The other day.
So, the US needs a dictator. Right. In terms of US politics, and again, I know this is really divisive, but I think this is really important to understand what's going on with Mike Johnson. So, Mike Johnson is in a really difficult position, right? And I slag off Mike Johnson routinely, but actually, he's in a really difficult position. So, he's become Speaker of the House of Representatives, which is the lower house. So, you got 100 senators, and you got 400 whatever. Congress people, right? Lawmakers, who there is a very narrow majority for the Republicans now, but it has got slimmer actually since he's got in as the Speaker. But he got in as Speaker as Kevin McCarthy was ousted. And the problem is, at the moment, Mike Johnson is being threatened with being ousted, right? Straight away again. And being threatened by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And you might dismiss her, but you need to listen to her rhetoric and what's going on to understand why Mike Johnson is doing what he's doing. He is effectively, he might also believe it, but he is being held hostage by these people who might be seen as on the fringe. So here we've got a Salon article saying MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, pushes great replacement rhetoric, and threatens Speaker Mike Johnson with an ouster on Fox News. Now, we're going to dip into what she says here, but this is what's going on. And this is directly related to Ukraine, and I'll show you how and why and how explicit that is. So bearing in mind, the guy that's speaking now in Pondering Politics is an over left-winger, right? So if you aren't, take that, what he says, translate it into however you want to see it, but actually listen to what he's saying here. And it's also about, we're going to see two clips played here. That is what I want you to listen to most. He's sped up a little bit.
So Mike Johnson finds himself basically in the same position Kevin McCarthy did last year, except his position is even worse because House Republicans have had a very narrow majority since they took the majority after the 2022 midterms. But that majority has become increasingly small since Mike Johnson became Speaker. And there is a cadre of far-right Republicans in the Republican conference in the House that thinks that they can be the tail that wagged the dog. They think that their small minority of a very narrow majority in one chamber of Congress can dictate fiscal policy in the United States with respect to government funding and the crisis at the southern border, despite House Democrats, Senate Democrats who have the majority in the Senate, Senate Republicans who generally have been working in relatively good faith with the Democrats, and a Democrat in the White House. They don't seem to understand that they are outmatched here with respect to power. And
they are outmatched, but they are also wielding that power quite successfully. So you might dismiss people like her, but they are actually dictating a lot of the narrative that is going on at the moment. And that's why we need to just kind of wake up to this.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene and other far-right Republicans are just making increasingly blunt and public threats to kick Mike Johnson out of his position if he's not able to somehow deliver a right-wing miracle.
No, I said that if he made that border deal, where if he passes that Senate border deal or so-called border deal, it's really an amnesty deal where Democrats are going to bring in millions and millions of illegals and turn them into Democrat voters. That's their plan, is to replace Americans with millions and millions of illegal aliens. And it upset me so much that this is the deal that Republicans in the Senate are making. And they want to do this in exchange for $60 billion more for Ukraine. Maria, our country's...
Now, pay attention. She mentions Ukraine, doesn't mention Taiwan, doesn't mention money for their own security in the borders, doesn't mention, as I say, Indo-Pacific, et cetera, et cetera. It is just Ukraine.
Broke. We're like a corporation on the verge of bankruptcy with $34 trillion in debt. The border...
The national debt is a problem. It's worth noting that $7 trillion of that is debt to itself. So, be a little bit warned about some of those numbers. However, national debt is an issue.
Crisis is a national security crisis that has Americans everywhere. It doesn't matter how they vote. Americans everywhere are sick and tired and fed up with it. And we could talk about the numbers and we could talk about all the things that produce daily outrage. But the real situation here is if the Republican Speaker of the House and any Republican or really anyone elected to serve in the United States Congress should be supporting, protecting America's national security interests, and they would never vote for that deal. And that's why I told Speaker Johnson if he made that deal in exchange for $60 billion for Ukraine, I would vacate the chair, and I still stand by those words.
Are you hearing that, right? So of everything I say today, that's probably the most important thing I've said today. You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene very publicly saying, if he makes that deal where $60 billion goes to Ukraine, she's not talking about she's very explicitly targeting Ukraine there. She's saying, if that money goes to Ukraine, and if that doesn't happen, I will oust you. I will oust you. So he then has to think, because it's so fragile in that Republican caucus, that he has to think, oh my goodness, I'm very close to not being the speaker anymore. And she said it. It's so important. I think we need to hear that again.
Security interests, and they would never vote for that deal. And that's why I told Speaker Johnson if he made that deal in exchange for $60 billion for Ukraine, I would vacate the chair, and I still stand by those.
She will vacate the chair if he makes that deal with $60 billion. That's why the US funding has not been released. That's why Mike Johnson has been the stick in the mud. Now, I've been blaming him a lot for it, but actually, he is unable, I guess, probably to do what's right, even if I don't know what he truly thinks in his head. But he is being held at gunpoint by Marjorie Taylor Greene, who also says, and if any other Republican does this, she's that leverage that she has is incredible. Let's then go to listen to what she has said to Steve Bannon then, and this just blows my mind.
With the president last year. I want to play another clip from Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's much more fiery here because she's having a conversation with Steve Bannon about, again, these bipartisan deals that Johnson wants to make or is willing to make because he really has no other choice with the Democrats.
The rest of it, Biden's regime basically shuts itself down.
No, if I'm Speaker of the House, I finish the job in the House. I pass the appropriation bills. And then I tell Chuck Schumer in the Senate, it's your job now, buddy. You do your work. And then we'll talk. But right now, Mike Johnson is getting rolled in meeting after meeting after meeting. When he is talking to Jake Sullivan and Chuck Schumer every day and impressed with these Four Corners meetings, but he's not talking to me and other important members in our Republican conference at all about any of the negotiations and any of the plans and exactly what we want to see done. He's failing on the job. But
maybe he's telling you that you're not an important member, but actually, in reality, you are, because you are starting to dictate some of the narrative.
Biggest red flag for me, Steve, right now that has me livid is this deal with Ukraine. This is a losing war. It is a losing issue. The American people do not support it. Our border security is not a negotiating tool for the
The American people do not support Ukraine. It's a losing war. This is so freaking important, right?
And exactly what we want to see done. He's failing on the job. But the biggest red flag for me, Steve, right now that has me livid is this deal with Ukraine. This is a losing war. It is a losing issue. The American people do not support it. Our border security is not a negotiating tool for the Ukraine war that the Pentagon loves and Joe Biden loves and the Democrats love and that these rhino neocon Republicans and Nikki Haley is frothing at the mouth over because her donors support it. No.
That's oh my goodness, I'm so livid. Like, we don't love the war, we just realize how freaking important it is that Ukraine prevails. You appear to want Russia to prevail, you terrible human being.
Mike Johnson should not be going in there with Chuck Schumer and saying, oh, yeah, we're going to make this deal where 5,000 illegal aliens, not migrants, cross the border every damn day so you can get $60 billion over to Zelensky, the most corrupt president in the world right now, because Ukraine is not the 51st state. Every day Mike Johnson gets closer and closer to this deal, brings me closer and closer to vacating the chair because I have absolutely had it.
And there you go. That is why Mike Johnson is possibly vacillating a lot here. Like, he's in a really difficult position where he could be ousted if he does a deal with the Democrats, which means you can't do a deal. I mean, I don't know what Marjorie Taylor Greene expects. Like, you are not in power. The Republicans are not in power. Okay, you've got a slim majority in the House of Representatives, but you don't have a majority in the Senate, and you don't have a president. In which case, you don't get to make the rules, right? But now you are saying that the House Speaker can't go and negotiate and can't compromise. And that's the whole nature of the beast. Is compromise. But you're saying he can't compromise, and if he does compromise, I will oust him. And so he's in a really difficult position, and my goodness, I don't like her. And I'm going to end it there. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. Speak soon.